Hello and welcome to this Astranti video on the top 10 most likely unseen issues for the May and August 2020 operational case study exams, focusing today on our pre-seen company ChargeIT. Okay, so the aim of this video is to provide you with a little bit of insight into some of the most important topics, some of the key syllabus areas that are likely to come up in the two exam sittings in relation to this pre-seen company, so May and August. Before we go any further, I would just like to clarify that there is of course no way that we can guess with 100% certainty the topics that CIMA will look to test in your exam. So this is very much our best guess based on the readings that we've made of the pre-seen. And I would also like to say at this point that there are, of course, other testable topics within the pre-seen that don't quite fit into this top 10 format that we've chosen to pursue for this video. So other areas of the pre-seen remain testable outside the areas we have highlighted or are going to highlight in this video. So what is the basis for my choice of these issues? Well, this is firstly based on my reading of the pre-seen and my analysis of the information that is contained in the pre-seen. And this is then also used in conjunction with what I know about the OCS exam, past OCS exams, particular topics that commonly come up, particular themes here. So a balance between both these areas of knowledge have formed the basis of my choice for these top 10 issues. Okay, so breaking down my decision making in a little bit more detail. The first aspect of this was the focus that particular issues have within the pre-seen. So if an issue has a particular amount of space devoted to it, then what this really signifies to me and should signify to you is that the examiner has attached a degree of importance to this issue. CIMA uses the pre-seen as the basis for which to test you in your actual exam. So if there are specific issues mentioned in here, specific issues brought up, then this is likely to be some of the things that CIMA is looking to test going forward. The other thing that I've allowed to inform my choice when looking at the pre-seen is the strategic importance of particular issues. So we've undertaken a SWOT analysis as part of our strategic analysis in the previous video of this series. And so any issues that were particularly relevant, particularly important to this analysis of the business and therefore to the business's strategy going forward are issues that I've likely included in this video. And by considering things that are important to the company's strategy based on this analysis, I've also taken into account issues that are likely to be important in the eyes of the company's directors. So the final thing that's influenced my choice, as I've talked about, is my past experience working at OCS level. So as part of my role at Astranti, I've produced a number of mock exams for the past 5 or 6 sittings at OCS level. So I have a fairly good idea of some of the content that typically comes up in past exams, content that is regularly examined. And so this therefore gives me an insight into some of the typical issues that CIMA like to examine and how they may once again have hinted at these issues within the pre-seen and are therefore relevant for your revision within this video. Okay, so I know that we're dealing with a new syllabus here and that this knowledge and experience relates to the old syllabus. However, I do very much believe that it is still relevant in terms of identifying the type of questions that CIMA will like to test in this new exam. And the other thing to consider here from CIMA's perspective is how easy is it to write issues on a particular subject. So this is another consideration that I will take into account when making my choices here. In terms of how to prepare for these issues, how to utilize this video in your exam, there are a range of key things that you can do based on the information I provide here. So the first thing is to prepare key models that you have come across in your studies to date based on information within the pre-seen. So there are a range of key models throughout the CIMA syllabus for operational level, and what you can do essentially is apply some of these models to some of the issues that I pick out as part of this video. The key thing here is to remember to adapt all the models, all the content for any new points that you produce or that you come across in the unseen. You shouldn't go into the exam with a preset question or a preset answer in your head. You must be able to adapt your answers, to adapt your knowledge to specific requirements and specific situations that are provided in the unseen. The other thing you can do is to practice mock exams that cover these key topics. So at Astranti, at OCS level, we produce full mock exams that you can purchase, and we try to ensure that the topics we cover in these exams are topics that are relevant to the top 10 issues that I'm highlighting here. So utilising these resources is a good way for you to practice writing mock questions under exam conditions on topics that may well come up in the exam. This video also then allows you to find relevant real-life examples that you can use in your exam. So the examiner really likes you to be able to demonstrate your wider knowledge about the industry in question. And what you can do if you are potentially aware of some of the issues that might come up in your exam is prepare a few sample paragraphs based on specific issues that are relevant to the top 10 issues that I have talked about. And then you can learn these real life industry example paragraphs and you can employ them as part of your actual answer in the exam. This video will also allow you to focus your revision on key points relating to key content. So for example, you may look at a particular costing or a particular budgeting model that may be relevant to this exam, and you may look through what are considered to be the key advantages and disadvantages of this model and learn these so that when you get into the exam your knowledge on this particular topic is tip top, and so you will therefore be able to obviously competently address any questions on these areas in the exam. And finally, this video should allow you to prepare somewhat in terms of the models that you may be able to utilize to support the relevant issue that could come up in your exam. So for instance, if there is a question on marketing, for instance, or the issue of marketing is one that may well be prevalent in this exam, then you can take some time to look at some of the key models surrounding marketing. Build up your knowledge in these areas, and then this will enable you to utilize these models more effectively to support your answers and your recommendations that you provide in the actual exam itself. Okay, so with that little introduction out of the way, let's move on to the first of our issues, which, as you can see on screen, is manufacturing. Okay, now before we look into this in a little bit more detail, what I would just like to clarify is that these issues aren't numbered based on their relevance or their importance to the preceding company or to the exam. They're simply numbered to fit into the sort of top 10 format that we structure this video in relation to. Okay, so without wasting any more time, let's get going with issue 10 on our list here. Okay, so what is the basis behind my selection of this issue here? Well, firstly and most simply, we are dealing with a manufacturing business here in ChargeIT, okay? So the business's sort of production and distribution operations are obviously then a key aspect of the overall operations of the business. If it gets its manufacturing wrong, then obviously it can't produce products of the right quality to consumers and the whole business is going to fall apart, okay? So a crucial area of operations to the type of business that we have in play here. And not only is it a key area of operations at the moment, in terms of continuing to facilitate the future growth that the business looks to achieve going forward, it's also a vital area. So continuing to improve and update the company's production facilities to allow it to produce a greater output in terms of products is crucial in terms of the business's strategy going forward, and is therefore a very relevant area to this exam. I also think there are a number of interesting questions that can be asked in relation to the expansion we've seen within this department in recent years. So we've seen that one of the key strategic decisions made by the business in the last 4 or 5 years was to bring production of the company's products back in-house when previously these had been outsourced to a manufacturer in Southeast Asia, okay? So I think given the importance of this area of the company's operations and developments here in the recent history of the business, I think again this is an important issue in relation to the exam. In terms of the current production situation at the business, for those of you who watched my pre-scene videos, you will, I'm sure, have become slightly sick of me going on about the issue of automation and mechanization within production over and over again. But the key point to make here is that there are still significant areas of inefficiency in the business's processes at the moment, and therefore significant areas that the business could look to expand and develop on, principally in terms of its use of technology within these processes, okay? So again, a key area of development for the business's operations going forward. Moving on, I think there are also a number of important questions that can be asked in relation to topics such as outsourcing in relation to the business's manufacturing operations. So we've seen how a key strategic decision on this factor has been made within the last 4 or 5 years, as we've just talked about. But going forward, I think there are still a range of other questions in relation to how the business produces things and whether it does this in-house or uses external providers in relation to areas of core competence like its battery technology. And finally, the last basis of my choice is the fact that sort of manufacturing as an overriding topic is highly testable from a range of different syllabuses. So we've hinted about how this might be tested from an E1 and a P1 perspective, but in terms of the F1 side of the operational case study exam, we have 2 key learning outcomes, D and F, which can specifically or strongly relate to manufacturing as an overall topic. So specific things like accounting standards in relation to things like non-current assets and inventory, but also crucial topics like working capital that are highly relevant here. Okay, so another key reason here, maybe from a slightly more exam-centric point of view in terms of why I have selected this overall issue. Okay, so now that you understand a little bit more my thinking in terms of selecting this issue, let's move on and have a look at some of the likely issues that you may actually come up against in your exam. Okay, so one of the key issues I think we might face concerns the automation of the business's production processes. Okay, so we have a range of processes in the pre-scene that seem to include a high level of staff involvement. And so I think the automation of some of these processes or the introduction of production technology to increase the efficiency and effectiveness of these processes is going to be a very prevalent, a very prominent issue in the exam. And I can think about this specifically in relation to key areas of operations such as the packing department, where the business currently employs 75 staff as part of its overall logistical side of this production operation. The identification and eradication of bottlenecks within the company's production process is also a very relevant topic to this issue, in line with what we've just talked about. Okay, so one such area of bottleneck within the business's operations at the moment could be its motor assembly, where we see an assembly line with various staff then involved in sort of assembling the company's motors based on different components and raw materials sent in by suppliers here. Okay, so identifying bottlenecks of this nature and overcoming them using specific theory from the P1 syllabus, so things like throughput accounting and the theory of constraints, are also highly relevant issues in relation to this topic. Linked to this, but maybe from a slightly more general perspective, we could see wider issues in relation to how the business can overcome areas of its inefficiency within its production processes, not only in relation to maybe staff or production techniques, as we've just talked about, but also in terms of things like the use of raw material, and also in relation to things like production costs. Moving on, given what we know about the importance of quality to this business's operations, we may see issues in the exam in relation to how the business is looking to implement procedures and processes to maintain the quality of its manufacturing operations. Now, this could relate to things like managing the relationships it has with its suppliers to ensure the quality of raw materials and component parts, but could also include topics such as total quality management. So assessing the potential suitability of processes of this nature to the company's operations and assessing the benefits that they may bring to ChargeIT. We may also see issues in relation to topics like wastage. So we know that from an environmental point of view, plastic waste is quite an important issue for the company, or is likely quite an important issue for the company. Okay, so we may see scenarios in relation to things like faulty products, which may need to be scrapped or may need to be sold for a discounted price. And you may therefore be asked to deal with the fallout from an issue of this nature. And finally, if we do see scenarios where the company is, say, purchasing new production equipment, then very clearly here, very obviously, we have a range of different topics in relation to the financial accounting standards which can be tested, okay? So you may see scenarios in your exam where you're asked to deal with the repercussions of new purchases of non-current assets from a financial accounting point of view. Okay, so things like the recognition and measurement of these assets. Okay, so moving on, what points must you raise in relation to these issues? Well, essentially here I think it's really important that you look to demonstrate your knowledge about the company's production processes and logistical operations, and use this in terms of highlighting areas where there are inefficiencies, where there are potential bottlenecks that might be impacting the overall sort of output and efficiency of the business's production operations. Okay, so 2 of these key areas that I think you must keep in mind in relation to a question of this nature, of course, relate to our motor assembly, which sounds like a particularly inefficient product with a sort of staff assembly line going on in play, but also in relation to the company's packaging operations, where we have a significant staff presence and therefore a significant cost associated with actually getting the product sort of packaged up and ready for delivery to consumers. Okay, so showing your knowledge of the business's production operations and its limitations in these areas is important. It's all well and good being able to identify problems with the company's production processes, but I think it's also crucial that you demonstrate your sort of knowledge here of potential solutions. So here what I'm talking about are, of course, the ways in which the business can make use of new sort of technologies in the environment in which it operates to upgrade and improve its production operations, addressing some of these inefficiencies, overcoming some of these bottlenecks that we've just been talking about in relation to specific areas of its operations here. Okay, so demonstrating your knowledge in relation to this sort of automation and mechanization potentially for the business is also important. And finally, I think it's really important that you maintain and that you continue to demonstrate a sort of understanding of the quality requirements of the company's production operations as you answer or as you deal with a scenario of this nature. Okay, so quality and reliability are of course key metrics to the overall business here. So demonstrating that you understand and that you're aware of the importance of these metrics and how they apply to the business's operations is also really important to a question of this nature. Okay, finally, we've looked at some of the key points you must raise in relation to this topic, but what about some of the key theory that you can use here? Okay, so as we can see on screen, there is a significant amount of P1 based theory that you can utilize when dealing with a question of this nature. So we know that P1 is a really important syllabus in relation to your operational case study exam. It forms a dominant part of a number of the key learning activities that you are going to be examined against. Okay, so a question of this nature is therefore a really good way for you to demonstrate your knowledge of relevant theories from this syllabus. Okay, so in terms of some examples of specific P1 and maybe even E1 theory that you can utilize here, I think total quality management is an example to start with. So obviously we've talked about how quality control is a really important part of the business's production operations in terms of maintaining the reputation and brand image that it has. So total quality management is an example of a sort of theory, of a sort of practice procedure that can be implemented within a business in order to raise the quality standards of the business's operations. So understanding, assessing the relevance of this particular theory in relation to ChargeIT as a business, how it operates, is an example of a theory that could be relevant to certain scenarios, certain questions that you come up against in your exam. Another theory which is highly relevant to manufacturing questions in relation to this business is throughput accounting and relevant theory like the theory of constraints. Okay, so demonstrating that you understand the process of sort of identifying and overcoming bottlenecks as part of a business's production operations is going to be a really relevant theory, I think, to this exam, given some of the areas of inefficiency that we know exists within ChargeIT's operations at the moment. From more of an E1 perspective, I think the value chain, Porter's value chain, is another useful theory to keep in mind here. Okay, so you can use this theory to demonstrate your knowledge of how ChargeIT as an organization adds value to its inputs when transforming these into outputs as part of its operations. And crucially, how the business can develop and add further value to these areas by making improvements in certain aspects of these operations. Moving back to the P1 syllabus and focusing more carefully on some of the decision-making related content in this syllabus with limiting factor analysis. So here we can think of this in terms of single limiting factors, but also in terms of an analysis of multiple limiting factors that ChargeIT may be encountering in its production processes at the moment, using things like linear programming to identify and overcome these issues. Topics of this nature, like linear programming, are very commonly examined by CIMA, so having a solid understanding of these and being able to demonstrate your knowledge of this theory is a really useful part of your revision. Sticking with some of the decision-making content in relation to the P1 syllabus, theory in relation to things like making discontinuation decisions surrounding products are potential areas that could be relevant and a useful theory knowledge for you to possess. While more importantly, areas like theory in relation to break-even analysis, which is another really important topic in the P1 syllabus that is regularly tested at operational case study level. Okay, so there are a variety of manufacturing and sort of product development based theories around which a topic like break-even analysis can be tested. Okay, so understanding this theory and then demonstrating your ability to apply it to the question that you get in your exam, if relevant, is another example of how you can utilize key P1 theory in this exam. And finally then, as we've talked about, there is a range of specific financial accounting theory that would be relevant to a manufacturing scenario of this nature, surrounding things like the accounting for non-current assets, accounting for inventory, and also accounting for things like impairment in relation to this aspect of ChargeIT's operations. Okay, so from a slightly different syllabus point of view, more key theory that you can employ in a question of this nature. Okay, and overall, when thinking about the importance of manufacturing to the type of business we are dealing with in this pre-scene, and then focusing more specifically on the range of theory that could apply to a question of this nature, I think you can see why I selected this issue as a really important area for you to do some revision in relation to in preparation for your exam.